What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the flinch mechanic in Modern Warfare 3. We're going to be seeing just how bad flinch is by default with various guns, as well as all of the elements that can affect flinch, whether that's some marksman gloves or an attachment that will increase our flinch resistance, or other attachments like our ammunition attachments that increase the amount of flinch we deal to enemy players. We're going to be taking a deep look at all of this to see just how important flinch is in Modern Warfare 3. And diving right in, let's have a look at our baseline. This is what we're going to be seeing in the vast majority of gunfights. With most regular guns, like most assault rifles and SMGs, the amount of flinch resistance you have with that gun that's in your hand is going to be 0.2 newtons, and the amount of flinch that you're dealing to enemy players is 0.7 newtons. And so this is what things look like when nobody's using anything that affects flinch. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of flinch by default in this game. Even if you're aiming right in the middle of their face, you're just going to be flinched right up toward the top of their head. And typically you're not going to be aiming directly at the head to begin with. So if you were aiming center mass, flinch should never really be an issue for you, even with multiple shots stacking together. So that's our baseline and the flinch you'll experience in the vast majority of gunfights you'll find yourself in this game. Next, let's have a look at what happens when we improve that flinch resistance, typically with a rear grip. You can cut this down to 0.1 newtons for the average gun out there. I think just about every assault rifle or SMG, if not all of them, have a rear grip that'll do this. And as you can see here, this does noticeably cut down on that flinch. We're no longer flinching right up toward the top of the enemy player's head, we're just flinching more toward where their forehead is now. And even with multiple shots fired, it handles it just fine. So while with most engagements you find in this game, I'd say this is unnecessary since the standard flinch is just fine to begin with, if you are going for those really long range fights, or you're planning on taking battles with people that are on like extreme head glitches, then cutting this down to 0.1 newtons may help you out a little bit there. Now, let's have a look at the Marksman gloves and see how much they help with our flinch resistance. So we are going back to 0.2 newtons. We took that rear grip off in this case, but we've now added Marksman gloves to our class setup. And with this, you can see it's definitely improved from the base. However, if you were to take a very close look like I did and go like pixel by pixel and frame by frame, it turns out the Marksman gloves are just slightly worse than that rear grip that I put on that cut this down to 0.1 newtons. So this doesn't cut our flinch value in half like that rear grip will, but it still improves it quite a bit, and it's pretty close to the same thing. Honestly, you probably wouldn't even tell the difference between the rear grip and the Marksman gloves in-game, but you will definitely start to notice this when we get into higher flinch guns. So let's do that. Let's move into the sniper rifle category, and in this case, we're using the longbow sniper rifle, and with this, our flinch resistance is 0.8 newtons, and keep in mind, the lower the value, the better, and therefore this has significantly worse flinch values, as expected with a sniper rifle, and this is a good thing for game balance. But as you can see here, being shot by the exact same gun as the previous tests, you can see I'm flinching significantly higher than I would with a typical assault rifle or SMG. And this is the type of thing that's absolutely going to have a big impact on a gunfight with a sniper rifle. So in this case, we probably do want to try our best to cut this down as much as possible. So let's have a look at what happens when we put the Marksman gloves on using the longbow. And as we can see here, while we are still flinching noticeably above the target, this is quite noticeably better than not using the Marksman gloves. And since we have a larger gap here, I was able to get a fairly accurate measurement on this. It appears the Marksman gloves will be cutting down our flinch by roughly 30%. So not quite that 50% value that you get with a rear grip, and therefore the rear grip flinch resistance attachments tend to be actually better than the Marksman gloves when it comes to flinch resistance. However, of course, you have the ability to stack these together, so you can use Marksman gloves as well as an attachment that helps with flinch resistance, and this is what that will look like on the longbow. There is very little flinch here. It's not quite as low as like a standard gun in a standard situation, but it's getting pretty close to that point. And generally speaking, if you're aiming center mass in this situation, you're still going to be hitting your target unless you're at really long ranges. So that wraps it up for the first portion of this video. This is talking about attachments and perks that will reduce the amount of flinch that you experience. However, the Marksman gloves do have an additional benefit here that I wanted to take a brief look at before we look at the attachments that increase the amount of flinch that you deal. And this additional benefit you gain from Marksman gloves, according to the menus, is you have reduced sway while aiming down sight as well, which seems very beneficial. So let's have a look at our first side-by-side using an assault rifle, and I put an optic on here just so it's a little easier to visualize. And honestly, I can't really tell much of a difference here. If you're paying attention to just how much it's sweeping over that logo, whether it's with or without the Marksman gloves, it appears to be swaying in roughly the same area, and as far as I can tell, the speed of that sway also appears to be the same. So I thought maybe this is just designed to help with sniper rifles, so I went with the longbow with just the standard optic. And once again, it's the exact same situation here. I'm really not seeing any noticeable difference between these two. And as a result, I'm sure the Marksman gloves are doing something very minor in the background to our sway, but it is a negligible change, and therefore I wouldn't be using these gloves for this specific purpose. They are nice for that flinch resistance, but they're really not going to do anything noticeable for your idle sway. And with that out of the way, let's move into the attachments that help increase the amount of flinch that we deal to enemy players. So this is going to be ammunition attachments, namely the Overpressured P, as well as some of the other guns will have a certain ammunition that will increase the amount of flinch you deal. Like with the Holger 5.56, you can use round nose ammunition, for instance. But the main one here is Overpressured P. And with all of these tests from here on out, we're not using any attachments to reduce the amount of flinch that we experience on our end, just to keep things simple so we're not mixing stuff up too much here. But in this first case here, we're once again looking at a standard situation. I've got just a regular assault rifle or SMG in my hands here with 0.2 newtons of flinch resistance. However, my enemy is now using the Overpressured P rounds, which will increase the amount of flinch they're dealing to 1.3 newtons. And when we look at the comparison, this is a fairly subtle change, but there's definitely a little bit more flinch here, and that at least slightly increases the odds that you'll end up flinching the enemy off target. Is it still generally going to be fine, especially if you're aiming center mass? Yeah, you're still generally going to be staying on target. This isn't going to be pushing you off target, but if you happen to run into somebody that's aiming a little bit too high, you may now flinch them above the head, whereas without this ammunition, they would end up just shooting you in the head. But that's just with regular guns in your hand. What if you're sniping against somebody that's using that Overpressured P ammo on a regular assault rifle? Well, this is where it becomes a whole lot more noticeable. As you can see here, you flinch a ton when using a sniper rifle against this ammo type. And this is the type of thing that's absolutely going to be throwing you off target very often, much more often than if they weren't using that ammo type. And as a result, after seeing this, if you end up in one of those sniper lobbies and you're really having a hard time against a good sniper, especially a quickscoper, I would highly recommend putting on the Overpressured P ammo, because this is going to be an excellent counter to those players. It's really going to push them off target, and they're going to have to time that and fight that pretty hard to be landing consistent shots on you. In saying that though, if you don't really have any snipers in your lobby and you're just playing against people using SMGs and assault rifles, I'd say you probably want to spend that attachment point somewhere else. Sure, it is helping a tiny bit, but I don't think it's really going to be affecting the outcome of very many gunfights. And like I said, you're probably just better off spending that point elsewhere on your gun in a way that's going to have a more significant impact on your gunfights. So there we go. That's going to wrap it up for today's breakdown of flinch and flinch resistance, as well as flinch increasing attachments in Modern Warfare 3. Overall, when it comes to my thoughts on flinch, I think they've got it balanced quite nicely in this game. I'm happy to see that with regular full auto guns, flinch is rarely going to be a factor in the gunfight, but it's still technically there. There's still a little bit of a punishment for being shot, but you can at least compensate for it just fine. And on top of that, I like the fact that there is very noticeable flinch on sniper rifles. I think that's the best way to keep snipers balanced in Call of Duty, especially when we're talking about quickscopers. I really have no problem getting quickscoped in a clean manner. If I don't get any shots off on them and they quickscope me, fair play, nice shot, I've got no problem with that. My problem always comes down to pumping a bunch of rounds into them, and as I'm doing that, they aim down sight and hit me with perfect accuracy. That's always a much more frustrating death to accept. So at least knowing that there's a decent amount of flinch for sniper rifles, if they still manage to quickscope me after I pump a bunch of shots into them, then at least I know they kind of got lucky, or they were actively using things on their class setup to cut down on that flinch, and that makes for pretty good balance between the playstyles, at least in my opinion. Now, of course, this is where I want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. First off, how are you feeling about flinch in general in Modern Warfare 3? And second, what do you think about those Marksman gloves? Do you think they're powerful enough, or do you think they should do more when it comes to sway and flinch resistance? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.